Discover how love has unified a Los Angeles community through decades of civil unrest, gentrification, and natural disasters when the Reverend Victor Cyrus-Franklin shares the story of Holman United Methodist Church, an historic church embodying its Wesleyan heritage as a center for community organizing and worship. Pastor Victor, welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
I appreciate you coming on today. I believe we're going to have a really interesting and engaging conversation. I'm eager to get into that. Before we do, however, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. That's my home, my hometown. I'm a son of a retired elder in the United Methodist Church, my mother, and a retired public school teacher and educator. So, in some way or form, public service becomes a part of what I do. But yeah, born and raised there. A spouse is a Presbyterian Church USA clergy person, clergy woman, and we're just proud parents of two kids. And we're out here in the Los Angeles area, serving currently, of course, as pastor of Holman United Methodist Church here in LA. And yeah, just a little bit about me, where I'm from, what I'm doing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Holman UMC, wow, so much history at that church, through that church. For our audience that may not know about Holman UMC, can you just give us I don't even know how you could give us a snapshot of that, but
Mm.
just maybe its importance as a place in Los Angeles, as a place where just a voice for the civil rights movement, for marginalized communities. There's a lot.
Well, absolutely. Holman Church is celebrating its 80th anniversary this year, 80 years in
Wow.
ministry. And it was founded 80 years ago, really, as a place for Black residents who were moving into Los Angeles area from other parts of the United States, as well as the world, for that matter, whether Panama or Jamaica or Belize, so just all over. And it was really a place to create a community and a home for folks who were fleeing whatever issues they were facing back home, to create a home, here in the Los Angeles area. And so, to fast track just a bit, it may be most known now because this was the church of our pastor emeritus, who just passed away last year, Reverend James M. Lawson Jr., who was a pastor here for 27 years and is really considered the architect of nonviolent resistance. He and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were close friends and colleagues. And Reverend Lawson really introduced Dr. King to the theory of nonviolence, because Reverend Lawson was a missionary in India where he encountered Gandhian nonviolence. And from there, read about the Montgomery bus boycott and said, I have to get back home, and introduced the theory really grounded in who he knew Jesus to be. He said, well, I understand this is Gandhian and Hinduism and all, but this is really resonates with the life of Jesus and what Jesus teaches us and who Jesus teaches us to be. And so from there, this congregation has a strong heritage as a Black congregation that works across ethnic, across religious bounds, to really see what it really means to be the beloved community, and to work together toward that end. And so, with his legacy, again, he just passed away last year. We're just standing on the shoulders of he and so many others who came together to imagine a congregation and a local church community that has that kind of witness for the world.
That it's a big legacy. It's a legacy that definitely just spills over. I mean, we're all so proud of the work that Reverend Lawson has done. Tell me what that looks like at Holman and for your congregation. How does his, to use the word legacy, how does that just permeate the work that you're doing?
All the way through, it's the congregation as a base, as a space for instance, a labor organizing, working workers who are working for fair wages, working for safe working conditions, in the area. Holman has historically been a place where, when labor organizations, communities need a place to gather, to discern, to pray, to organize, to strategize, this is a place to come, to do that. Reverend Lawson taught his nonviolence workshop once a month up until the end of his life. I mean, just people would just come from all over to learn about how to apply those principles, of nonviolence, grounded in the gospel of Jesus. So that becomes a place. But again, also working interfaith. So working with our Jewish siblings and our Muslim siblings and other siblings who would come together. So we would go to their homes. They'll come here to our house, and we'll come together to organize and to strategize, and frankly, for that matter, to worship even, together in some occasions. And so really living out the witness that way, but then also just to do what we do as church. I mean, to sing the songs of Zion. This year, it's February, it's Black History Month. And so there's the 65th annual Negro Spirituals Concert is happening here on the fourth Sunday of the month. And so standing on the heritage of that tradition, I mean, coming out of Nashville, of course, it was popularized by the Jubilee Singers from Fisk University. And it's just a powerful witness of singing the songs of freedom to help guide us on this journey ahead. So those are just a small sampling, but those are the ways that we strive to live out that witness even to this day.
As you were talking about that, Pastor Victor, it's also very Wesleyan.
Absolutely.
John Wesley, that was John Wesley's vision, is that the church would really be the center of the community, where it's serving people and meeting the needs of that community. And it sounds exactly what Holman UMC and all of you are doing there. Yeah. So you were telling me a little bit before we started recording about some of the big projects there, and I had, we had said that we wanted to talk about how church as a whole can be a beacon of hope and a place of belonging. And you shared with me one of the big projects you guys have going on now that I'd love to hear more about.
Absolutely. So as a part of my appointment, so I'm appointed as the lead pastor here at Holman. Prior to being at Holman, I was a solo pastor, if you will, at the First United Methodist Church in Inglewood, California, just south of here. So a part of my appointment now is also to continue to supervise the First United Methodist Church of Inglewood as we pursue a 60-unit affordable housing development on the property, on the premises of the church. And so also we're working creatively on a cooperative parish structure for Holman Church and the Inglewood First United Methodist Church to share in ministry and in mission, with the development being a core part of what we could do. How can we really reach the community, right, through that development? But it's a very exciting venture. We've been on this journey with Inglewood now for about 5 or 6 years. And the goal, if you're familiar at all, if anyone watches the NFL on the TV, National Football League, the premises itself is about 3 blocks from the SoFi Stadium where the Chargers and the Rams play on Sundays. And it's a community that's very much being gentrified. I mean, lower income residents are being priced out. When I became the pastor at Inglewood about 7 years ago, there were members of the church who were being priced out of their apartments. And we even had one of our members who was a school board member for the school district and had to resign because she was priced out of her apartment and couldn't find a place in the city that she could afford. So it's that hostile environment in the city and for the congregation. And so housing justice really became a core part of this principle. What does it mean to create a city of belonging, a community of belonging, and for that matter, a congregation of belonging, where we're in solidarity with residents? And so we work with interfaith partners and work with local congregations and small businesses and homeowners and work toward that effort to get a rent stabilization measure to say, let's at least help keep our residents here. And then from there, began to explore affordable housing. And so now that project is looking to serve approximately half of the units for seniors and the other half for low-income workers, so that those who are working at the arena developments, the stadium developments, the hotels in the area can walk to work instead of having to catch public transportation for an hour plus, one way, to get to and from work.
Wow.
And we can create a community there where those residents feel supported, nurtured, financial literacy courses, mental health services, all that happening on site, where the church really becomes, as we're calling it, a hub of hope and healing. As you mentioned, John Wesley, a hub of hope and healing in the heart of Inglewood. So it's a very, very exciting venture. And so again, we're looking at how to continue Holman's legacy, in supporting that type of work, but also to work connectionally in our system to do God's work, in the community and in the world.
Wow, that's so exciting, so big and so impactful. This really, a 60-unit affordable housing, structure, and just the reach of that it sounds so complicated too. There's a lot, I'm sure there's a lot of people that come together to make that happen. But I love that phrase, a hub of hope and healing. And I'm just wondering, for the United Methodists who are out there who aren't in churches where they have the resources, or they have, they just don't have the space or the opportunity really to do something like the housing. Where are some other places that you've seen through your work where this hope and healing can be shared?
Well, it's really about being prayerful and discerning and being relational in the community one is in. So even before we were on the housing journey, it's so much of it is about being in relationship, getting out of the silos of the four walls. We say this all the time, getting out of the silo of the four walls, but really branching out relationally. So, for example, another project we were exploring, there's the LA Philharmonic Orchestra is moved in down the street, in Inglewood. There's a there is a long waiting list of kids and families who are trying to get into the orchestra. My daughter was able to get in, thank the Lord. So she's learning trumpet right with them. But so there's an obvious need in the community, a need in the neighborhood around more families wanting to get their kids involved in music. So part of what the imagining for us is, well, for the families who are on the waiting list, what can be provided for them as they wait to get into the program? Can the church be a place where we can partner with an organization where those kids who are waiting don't have to keep waiting, but at least in the interim, they can come to the church and get music lessons, right? And so it's about discerning the need, what's happening in the neighborhood, what's happening in the community, who can we partner with, what resources do we have that we can bring to that partnership, and how can we be a blessing? Part of the vision for that particular program in the initiative is it can become a pipeline for church musicians. There might be a kid who sees the pipe organ and goes, you know what? I'm so curious about this. I want to learn more about this, and we keep the pipe organ alive. We don't know, but the whole point being really discerning what the needs are in the neighborhood. Even if so many of our congregations are commuter congregations now, especially in the city, but really seeing what the needs are, and then how can we be a partner in meeting those needs, which is a different question from how can we do it ourselves, right?
Yeah, well, we get outside of ourselves. That question is, it's not about us.
Right, right. So we have
And
a role to play, but it doesn't have to come through us. If Jesus is the Messiah, and we're not supposed to be, Jesus helps to equip us and empower us to do the work with the gifts that we have, right? So
yeah.
that's what I would say. That's one example. But there are so many ways in really discerning what the needs are in the community and who the partners are that we can work with to help be a blessing.
We live in a society right now that is not feels, but is divisive. We
Yeah.
have a lot of hostility and a lot of conflict. How can we in the church just really get out into our communities and our neighborhoods and just show God's love? Because I think for some people that feels scary right now.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a couple ways to respond to that question. I mean, one is really out of the sense of the divisiveness we're experiencing publicly has existed privately. And so it's not necessarily new. And in that sense, too, it's not necessarily the new, and it's not new for those who are in the communities who've been most impacted by the different discriminations and bigotries and others, that we have. And so, I think being honest about that, becomes important, and how we approach it. I think too, the metaphor that I've used in the churches that I've been in, there are a lot of metaphors we use for church. The church is a hospital, right? So folks come, to the hospital to get healing from whatever
Mhm.
experience. I like to think of a church as a rehearsal hall. And it's in the rehearsal hall where we learn how to play together. We learn how to sing together. We're working it out. And so, in that sense, if we understand our local churches as places where we're learning how to love across difference, if we understand the church as a place where we're learning the lectionary from just this past week, focus on, 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, love does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable, it's not rude, it does not rejoice in wrongdoing or injustice, but it rejoices in the truth. We need to practice that at the congregational level in space. There are differences within us amongst even our own congregations. There are differences within us connectionally, obviously, that we need to practice that spirit that God is equipping us with. And I think the more we learn how to do that in the safe or brave space that is the church, the more equipped we are to demonstrate that witness out in the world. I think if we are afraid of practicing that witness internally in our own congregations, then we're not equipped or empowered to express that witness and out in the world. And I think the more that we can practice that inside, the more we can practice it outside as well.
Well, and then it's going to be, when people come into the church or we're out with people, it's going to be authentic.
Right.
If we're practicing it inside the church and we're working to get it right, or we're at least trying to get it right, then I believe that maybe that's going to be more, people will want to come alongside us, perhaps more. The church gets accused of being hypocritical.
And in terms of a practice or a spiritual discipline, I mean, one of the things I've introduced to the congregations I've been in the last, 7 or 8 years or so is in the Black church tradition, especially, there's always an invitation to Christian discipleship, right? We open up the doors of the church, as we say, and as a part of that invitation, I really encourage folks to ask, in our heritage, our tradition as Methodists and as Wesleyans, is to ask of ourselves and ask of one another, how is it with your soul? What makes your soul prosper? And I remind folks on a weekly basis, some of us who made it in person to church, because as opposed to the pandemic world, we know but some of us who made it in person to church, some of us didn't say 2 words to each other with the folks we came to church with. Let's take an opportunity just to have a soul check, if you will. Yes, we have disagreements. Yes, we have arguments, but can we at least just check in on one another's soul as part of our heritage that we draw from? Asking the soul question can get to the deeper roots of why we think the way we think, why we're responding the way we're responding, because there's something going on in the soul that we confident we can share and not be judged more than even what we think. So it's a spiritual matter, really, ultimately, more so than it is an intellectual, though it is to some extent intellectual as well. And so I think as a church, we're really called to live in that space. How is it with your soul? What makes your soul proper? How is it with the soul of the congregation, the soul of the people, the soul of the community, the soul of the nation? Right.
It feels like it takes a lot of trust,
Mhm.
and it takes you being, vulnerable to answer the question honestly, because I do think that we kind of are real quick to say it's fine,
Right.
when it's
It
not
is well.
fine.
For him, it is well. 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 Right.
It is well with our soul. It's,
Right.
we
And then
have
that
bumper stickers.
right, and that is it. But really, I think, but that's really where we are. And so we can't talk about belonging, really, beloved community, going back to King, really. We can't talk about healing, really, if we're not developing the spiritual disciplines to go into that deep space with the folks that we're in immediate community with, let alone with those who we're not in active community with.
I'd like to take a moment out of our conversation with Pastor Victor to tell you about a new book, one that explores a fresh vision that combines centuries old traditions with innovative modern approaches. Treasures Old and New Wesleyan Faith for Life Today by Michael Adam Beck and Steve Harper is a compact yet powerful book that dives into the heart of Wesleyan beliefs and practices, offering insights that are as relevant today as they were in early Methodism. This book is perfect for church leaders looking to unite their congregations around Wesleyan identity and future direction. The way forward requires both old ways and new ways. Visit cokesbury.com today to get your copy of Treasures Old and New and guide your congregation toward a new era of Christian experience, combining old traditions with current practices for a revitalized church community. Now back to our conversation with Pastor Victor.
So when you're giving this kind of this charge, if you will, to your congregation, tell me how's it going? How are people responding?
Well, it's something I think. So with Inglewood, we've done this for a while, so they're folks are kind of used to it now, and it helps with online community as well. Because we'll say, you may be at home, you might be in the bed, you might be on the couch, watching the TV, experiencing the service on YouTube, and we'll say, look, you might be the only one in your home in worship online. Take a moment, pull out someone else in the home, and just ask. Don't ask why aren't you in worship, or what's wrong with you, or why can't you? I care about you. We're about to pray. How is your soul right now?
Mm.
Which is of course, a very different question from how are you doing? Or how
Mhm.
are you feeling? Or how is your soul? How is your spirit? And we'll say, and then sometimes we'll even encourage folks to text, and they'll do this, to text others and say, how is your soul? And if an emoji expresses how your soul is right now, then send that.
Yeah.
You may not have the verbiage, you may not have the words, but all you have is a deep breath and a deep sigh, then express that. And we give that to God, as we go to God in prayer. But I think so in that sense, the response and people will report back, so we'll have they'll say, well, I have family members in Arkansas, who are with us in worship. And so we'll check in after worship and just ask one another this. And even though we're in different parts of the country, and it helped open a window into what's really going on, you know. For congregations I've worked with that are new to it, it takes some time. It's awkward because we don't, but again, that is not just, that's our heritage as a church. I think ultimately that's the question that Jesus is asking of us, more than the question of, are you saved, or when are you going to get right with God? Jesus cares so much about us. How is your soul?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's that heritage, and also that's a heritage in our Wesleyan tradition that we can recover, in terms of
Yes.
what the Holy Club is and what
Yes.
sanctification is. It's a part of our heritage that we can recover, especially to get through these trying times that we are in. So much of our world, as a social media world, is very superficial, and so taking the time to slow down. I just expressed this past Sunday, during the invitation. Maybe today you don't need to reach out to someone else. Maybe you just need to talk to yourself right now and just say, call yourself by name and go, how is your soul? How is my soul right now? As we prepare to pray, we need to slow down a bit. And I think God is waiting for us in that space, in that place, and something holy happens where God is at work to work on us in the salvation and healing journey that we're on.
And you were talking about asking people how are they, as opposed to how is your soul. I did think about what you're in Los Angeles and what the people of Los Angeles have in the past less than a month been dealing with the fires in various places throughout the area, which I don't imagine anyone. It touched us outside of Los Angeles, so I can't imagine being in LA what that was like. How has your congregation been? How have you guys been working through that with the community? Because I know there were churches that were lost. There were, but then the churches are also being looked to as a place of, a place of help and in the community
Right.
center aspect.
Well, my congregations in particular weren't directly impacted in terms of the members, but everyone knows someone who had to be displaced. Many of us had to house folks who were fleeing the areas that were required evacuation because of the fires. Also, these are places where we know these congregations because there are siblings, in faith, and we know these neighborhoods and these communities. And so now that the fires have been contained, now it's its own trauma in looking at how do we help rebuild these communities. It seems so insurmountable. Thinking of a story in particular, last week there was a convening of multi-faith leaders with the mayor of Los Angeles and staff and county staff around an organized response to support families, small business owners, just business owners generally, workers. I mean, what do you do? Even if your home is still, if your apartment or your home is still there, and what do you do now? There were nurses. And so when half of their clients now no longer live in the area, how do you make a living? Where do you go? What do you do? There's so much dealing with speculators now who are trying to acquire this real estate from the homes and the residences that were burned down, and offering very low offers, but because so many families are in desperation, are considering taking these offers, and I'm quickly, just one story in particular is in the Altadena area. As a gentleman who bore witness that their family moved to the Southern California area in the 1950s, and from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he said his grandparents, great grandparents, great grandparents, and great grandparents moved here because of the fires in Tulsa, because of the Black Wall Street race massacre, that happened there. And so, fleeing Tulsa, Oklahoma, they came to Southern California, the Los Angeles area, and the Altadena area was one of the few places where Black residents could purchase homes, could buy a home legally because of redlining. And so he said, so his grandmother has a home there. His parents have a home there. He has a home there now. Aunts, all of them lost their homes, lost the local bank, lost the local schools. Everything is gone. And so it was because of actual fires fueled by racism then that brought him here. And now, in response to the fires, speculators are coming, trying to displace them and move them from their properties again. So that's what people here are up against. And that's a part of the organized response. And so, in really discerning, so part of the message that we talked about on this past Sunday was, really asking the question, how deep is your love? And then grounded in 1 Corinthians 13, what does love look like? We talk about, and what does love look like when we're loving the people more than we're loving the property or the potential money, financial profit that could come from it. And so what does it really mean to love the people? And what does our faith witness look like in terms of really loving all God's children and loving the people? And so that looks like support for renters who don't have a place to live. It does look like support for workers who need some type of guaranteed basic income to help figure out what's next. It does look like legal support for property owners and homeowners who are trying to put their lives together. It does look like this is what love looks like. And it's a part of our witness. And so many families are still impacted. This rebuilding effort will take years. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But we're praying God's provision, along the way as we continue to band together as a community and to live in faith.
Pastor Victor, it's so humbling, I guess is maybe the word, to hear you just talk about what the area is going through, what so many people are going through. But one of the reasons I reached out to you about being a guest on Get Your Spirit in Shape is that I read an article about how you, it was about the civil rights movement and United Methodists who had been impacted. And there was a quote in that you said, by working together, we can get there. And that was a specific quote about a specific time and movement, but it feels like it fits here too, that these are really big situations and big challenges. And I appreciate hearing about the ecumenical way that the churches are coming together to work. But just to go back to that, by working together, we can get there. What I read was that you were really impacted as a child by the civil rights movement. And particularly, I mean, this is a conversation that's great for any time, but particularly being Black History Month. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Well, I mean, growing up in Nashville, Tennessee, that's just so much a part of the DNA of growing up in the church again as a PK, as a preacher's kid, as well, that impact. But also in the 80s, I grew up in the 80s. And so that was the period of when the holiday, the Martin Luther King holiday, became a federal holiday. And so one of the stories I tell is at that point, at that time, during that effort, when it became a holiday, it wasn't a day off. I mean, schools were still open, government offices were still open. That just wasn't. And so I remember my mother taking us out of school to go to the King Day observance in downtown Nashville. At the time, was the Municipal Auditorium. That's where we were at the time for that observance. And we would go because she felt it was more important for us to be there, that there was an education we could get there that day that we couldn't get in school. And so we would march from different places around the city, and labor organizations would be there, justice oriented, organizations would be there, and you would see the signs, we see what the current issues are, what are the current fights, what are the current efforts of diverse peoples coming from across the community, across the city, gathering together, not only to remember Dr. King and his legacy, but to continue and further that work of justice and that work of peace and that work of repairing the country, in this case, the city, just to be what God has really called it to be. And so I vividly remember those times on those Mondays going to those, and then after it was over, my mother would take me into the last half of the day of school. But the whole point being, there is an education there that I needed, and it was formative. And to that end, I mean, even to this day, also big connection, big shout out. I'm a D-Min candidate at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, and my project is tied to D-Min project is tied to the affordable housing development. And so part of what the team decided to do this past King Day was to do a day-long strategy retreat on seeing the project to its end. So the congregation and the partners and everybody came together that day saying, yes, the inauguration is happening, but this is an opportunity to further the work of Dr. King in building beloved community through creating affordable housing in our own neighborhood. Let's spend the day doing that. So it's truly not a day off, but it was a day on to energize this movement, to energize the struggle in our own local neighborhood, our local community, our local area. And so again, that was formative for me then. And I see that still playing out today as I have my own kids, and we're trying to help impart those values upon them.
I love that you use Dr. King's the birthday holiday in that way. That was just such a great, a great affirmation of the legacy of work, and just to see how it can continue. Thank you for sharing that. And as we finish up today, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't yet talked about?
I think, and this may point to some of what you asked about earlier, and this is a bit Wesleyan as well. At least this is the case I'm trying to make, and you can let me know if this makes any sense. But I think we misinterpret Dr. King and his understanding of integration often. We often do. And in his writings, Dr. King talks about segregation, desegregation, and integration. And he talks about, obviously, the sin of segregation. He talks about desegregation as a change of the law, a correction of the law. And he talks about integration as a process of genuine interpersonal and intergroup doing toward the beloved community. That's the language that he uses. Those are very Wesleyan categories. They correlate very well with Wesleyan categories, where segregation is that period before the salvation of God has moved in such a way where we realize what God is doing in our lives. But yet the prevenient grace of God is still calling and pulling us and drawing us into that space. In justifying grace, that's where we're aligned with God. That's the correction of the law. That's the change of the law to put us in right relationship with God and one another. And integration is really the sanctification process. It's that space of the Holy Spirit transforming us and molding us in the image of Christ, transforming us through relationship with one another as the body of Christ, and in community, in human community. And so, um, and so sometimes we stop at the event of justification, stop at the event of desegregation, and don't continue in what our Wesleyan emphasis is, and that's sanctification. That's the transformation by the whole power of the Holy Spirit. And so I think that's the invitation that we have today to answer your question around working together. We can get there. Really respond to the invitation of the Holy Spirit that's inviting us to be changed, to be transformed, to be molded and shaped in the image of Christ. And so that requires us to have enough courage to not just rest on the justifying event, but to be open to God shaping us and molding us through sanctification. I'm married to a Presbyterian. Presbyterians are Reformed and they have an emphasis on justification, but we are Methodists. So our emphasis is sanctification. And so for all of the difficulty that comes with that in terms of transformation, that's the invitation that God in Christ is inviting us into. And I think that's the challenge that we have for today.
Well, I've never heard it explained like that, but yes, it absolutely aligns and makes sense. And it is in the transformation. I mean, that's what Jesus came to transform us. And so that's, we stop. I do believe we frequently stop short of all the of what Jesus has to offer, what the Holy Spirit has to offer for our lives. And I believe that's what you're saying as well. We just, we don't make it we don't follow through. I love that. I believe there's a book in there for you to write.
Yeah, well,
when you get through building, 60 units.
right. Yeah, and this DMN project and all this other stuff we're doing. But yeah, for sure.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Well, the final question I'm going to ask you is the question we ask all of our guests on Get Your Spirit in Shape. And that's, how do you keep your own spirit in shape?
So thank you. So I appreciated the examples that you gave from before. So I'm going to offer a non-traditional example as well. I love listening to music on vinyl records. Have a bit of a record collection at home, and even there's a ministry that started with one of my churches called The Listening, where we would get together at homes of the members and listen to music on vinyl records and talk about how it speaks to our heart. Answering the question, how is it with your soul? And how does the song express where your soul is right now, And so for me, and there's a record in particular from an artist out of the UK called Joe Armand Jones. He did a song with an artist from Los Angeles, Georgia Ann Muldrow, and it's called Yellow Dandelion. And so for me, especially when having a hard day, going home, putting that record on the turntable, pulling out the big album and spreading it out, reading the liner notes and closing my eyes. There's something about that experience that that speaks to my soul and speaks to my spirit and helps to ground me in the grace of God. And the theme of the song is really about, some people regard yellow dandelions as weeds, and they don't want you around, But it says, even when you die, you are multiplying, yellow dandelion, yellow dandelion. And so for me, it's a source of courage and of hope and of crucifixion and resurrection. And how
I love that. Wow,
so
that's powerful.
That helps me. Yellow Dandelion, Joe Armand Jones, Georgia Ann Muldrow on a vinyl. It has to be on a vinyl record, though. I have to listen to it on a vinyl.
Sure. And that, those album covers, those liner notes, they were this art in addition to the music.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything
It's a
about
full
it's just
experience.
art. It
The
is.
holistic is a full holistic experience.
Yeah.
And so now, so even my own kids now, they're all about vinyl records, 18 and 13 now, and so it's just something about that experience. So big up to analog technology,
I love that. Yeah. That's very holistic. You use that word, and yeah, it definitely must feel very grounding.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Pastor Victor, thank you for agreeing to be a guest on Get Your Spirit in Shape and just sharing what's going on at Holman UNC, that's sharing what's just really inspiring us to what is possible. And it sounds like you guys are doing some really amazing work to just be shining God's love throughout the area and beyond. So thank you for your ministry.
Yeah, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your ministry. This is a wonderful ministry in and of itself with the podcast. So bless you and thank you.
Thank you.
That was the Reverend Victor Cyrus-Franklin discussing how Holman United Methodist Church impacts and empowers its Los Angeles community. To learn more, go to umc.org/podcast and look for this episode where you'll find helpful links and a transcript of our conversation. If you have questions or comments, feel free to email me at a special email address just for Get Your Spirit in Shape listeners, gysis@umcom.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, we invite you to leave a review on the platform where you get your podcast. Thank you for being a Get Your Spirit in Shape listener. I'm Crystal Cavanis, and I look forward to the next time that we're together.